Good morning. Happy Friday. Happy Blacksburg Friday. So thank you all to those who are here in person. It is chilly and windy. It's very much a Blacksburg morning. I want to welcome you to this morning's ICAT Playdate. My name is Phyllis Newbill. I am the Associate Director of Educational Networks in one of our ICAT centers, the Center for Educational Networks and Impacts. First, I want to make sure everybody knows that we are filming this morning. So we're filming in 360. So at this moment, your image is going out on the internet, and it will exist on the internet afterwards. Please behave accordingly. If you haven't signed in yet, we'd love for you to sign in out by the donuts. That is how we justify donuts. So please do that. Very important. If you're watching online, good morning. So glad you're joining us. You don't need to sign in, but if you want PDN credit, if you're a Virginia Tech faculty and that's helpful to you, make sure you send me a note in the questions link so that I know that you're here. If you're here and getting PDN credit, just make sure you check in with me so I can mark you present. And I think that is all for this morning. If you're interested in participating in Hokie for a Day field trips, make sure you see me afterwards and check the ICAT webpage for grants that are due soon. I'm going to turn it over this morning to Eric Lyon for a proper introduction. Natasha, I'm so glad you're here. You all are in for a treat. We're in the Cube this morning. And if you haven't been in the Cube, this is a space with some pretty amazing speaker systems. Can I do my little surround sound thing? I'm gonna do my little surround sound thing. So if you have surround sound in your living room, you might be like 5.1. Okay, so that means there's 5 channels and 1 subwoofer. And if you go to the movies, it's like 8.3 because that's louder. Okay, in this room, it changes a little bit depending on the setup, but it's about 148.8. So with that.
Thank you so much. So it is such a pleasure to introduce Natasha Barrett, who is an iconic composer in the worlds of electroacoustic music and computer music internationally. And Natasha is a very ICAT kind of composer. She's an absolute consummate artist in the creation of dramatic music that is just emotionally powerful and just rich sonically. And she's also a tone scientist who is able to work with sound at a very precise and technical level, especially in the area of multi-channel audio and spatial audio. And it is such a pleasure to have her here in the Cube, one of the few spaces in the world where Natasha, I think, can fully express herself. So with that, welcome, Natasha.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you for having me here these past few days. It's been an exciting experience. It's not very often one gets to experiment in a room like this. So I've been doing lots of things the past few days. I'm going to start really at the beginning because this is really why I came to experiment. I called this first sort of title, Reconfiguring the Outdoor Sound Landscape, Revealing Music in the Noise. But actually this is part of a research project called Reconfiguring the Landscape, which I instigated a couple of years ago. It's now come to the end, so this is probably the last research testing that I'm actually going to be doing before I start finishing the write-up. So it's kind of an exciting close to the project. And the project was about how we can use spatial audio to evoke a new awareness of everyday sound landscapes. And part of my work became an investigation of how urban noise can be changed in some way to engage our listening. I should just say a few things. The project is hosted at the Norwegian Academy for Music in Oslo and funded by the Norwegian Agency for the International Cooperation and Quality Enhancement in Higher Education. And what I've actually then been doing here, because the project has been quite big, but what I've been doing here is to focus on 2 things. The first is artistic, and that is whether we can create mock-ups of some of the installations that I'm going to show you, whether we can recreate these real-world situations inside a room. And the other is technical. I'm going to throw the word ambisonics in a few times. Can I just see a show of hands on who knows what ambisonics is? Okay, so I won't throw the word in too many times. We can talk more about that this afternoon if anybody comes back around about 4 o'clock, I think, when we got more of a play session then too. But ambisonics is a way of working with 3D sound and trying to emulate 3D sound as we understand it from reality, or the sound around us. And I'm not going to talk more about that right now then, because it might be a bit too technical, and today is supposed to be fun and listening. So I will, why doesn't this doesn't work, okay. Okay, I'm going to have to click, I think, to move it on. I'm starting off with just a couple of statements to frame where I am. And so the first statement is, sound penetrates our outdoor spaces. Much of it we ignore. Its qualities are too fleeting or quiet or mundane to pay heed to above our thoughts or our other activities. Or we may experience sounds as an annoyance or a disturbance. And maneuvering our listening to be excited by outdoor sound, especially urban or city soundscapes, is not so easy. But I think this is very important as we are increasing urbanization and living in urban situations where noise is unavoidable and noise abatement does not always work. So we need to find a way to find interest in soundscapes which we really don't normally want to engage in, so that we are happier where we live. And so what I'm proposing is that amongst this noise can be found qualities of interest. And then as artists, we can start to draw on these features and develop sound artworks, which we can then replace into the urban sound landscape to enhance what's already there. So during the course of the project, I've actually worked on 4 outdoor sound installations in public spaces. And I'm not going to talk about all these installations because I just want to play some music. But the thing they had in common was that they were all placed in areas where there was particularly no interesting sound. It was just urban noise. The top right, you can see it's actually by a harbour, but there's a main road, a motorway almost close by, and there's a lot of noise coming from boats in the harbour. This is outside of Oslo, where I'm based. The second was set up in a amphitheatre area in the centre of Oslo. The third, which is the top right, this was commissioned by the Music Protocol Festival in Graz and was set up in the centre of the city of Graz. And the bottom right is the one I'm going to talk about and play here today. And this was set up at the fortress in the centre of Oslo. So the installation was called Presence Narva. Narva is presence in Norwegian. And the actual installation itself, just from the technical point of view, simply had 8 loudspeakers, which are quite discreet. You can't see them. They're not visually prominent. And a special loudspeaker, which was developed in collaboration with the IEM in Graz. But again, I don't want to talk too much about technology, but this was the way I was working to play back my compositions back into the public space. Of course, there are many things to talk about when it comes to public spaces, security, the weather. This was running for 2 months at the end of last year, computer controlled, and although there was a lot of rain, you could imagine every weather condition was thrown at the installation. It was still running after 2 months. So I was very happy about that. The sound materials then, because we're talking about sound. And they were recorded with this microphone. It's called the Eigenmic. This records a high-resolution 3D soundscape. So this isn't your standard microphone. It has 32 capsules located on a sphere. And without going into the technology of this, it means that we can record the 360 sound field at a much higher resolution than you can with normal microphones. It's not quite the same resolution as our hearing. We can hear a higher resolution than this microphone can pick up. But it's the best available at this time. There's a new version of this that's being made, which is even more high resolution, but it's not yet in manufacture. And all the sound materials that I've used in the installation, and also what I'm going to play back in here, were recorded from this microphone and then were transformed in various ways. And that's another challenge, which I will talk about when it comes to trying to recreate a 3D sense of reality in a room like this. The other technology, very briefly, was this loudspeaker. It's called a beamforming loudspeaker, and you send it actually an ambisonic signal, but what it does is it projects beams of sound like a lighthouse. And that means that you can point these beams of sound at surfaces and you hear the reflections coming back off the surface. This is really interesting because it starts to highlight the outdoor acoustics and those sounds that, yes, we understand outdoor acoustics, but unless we play with them like children do and start to sort of activate with transients and stamping your feet and clapping your hands, often these things we don't really hear. But outdoor acoustics are very interesting and are fingerprints telling us where we are. And so this loudspeaker was used to enhance our perception of those outdoor acoustics at the installation space. It's a picture of the opening. So you know what you're going to hear, because I'm going to quit the PowerPoint presentation in a moment and play something. You will hear a piece which is made from sounds that were recorded over many days, over many weeks, and many seasons, because I wanted to capture the entirety of, or sample the entirety of the soundscape that you would experience if you lived in this location. So you'll hear boat horns, bells from the town hall in Oslo, which is a long way away, footsteps, birds which are seasonally changing, some voices, sounds from industrial sites, sounds from cruise ships which are harboured in the Oslo fjord, and yeah, many other everyday urban kind of sounds. Right, so now I'm going to quit this because PowerPoint isn't interesting. And I'm going to show a max patch. This is really just to help me talk about how I've solved certain problems. Now, this piece was originally made in fourth order 3D ambisonics, and so that's, you could say that's one resolution of space. And that was fine because I was playing it back in a real outdoor space. But in here, if I want to try to recreate that sense, I need to look at or address a higher spatial accuracy. And this is a problem, because how do you get a higher spatial accuracy out of a lower spatial resolution source? And the thing about this room is that you can encode and decode the 360 spatial sound field at an incredibly high spatial resolution if you're using the right software, but you need the source to put into it. So one of the things that I've been experimenting with, which has also led on to some more artistic experiments, which I'll mention if I get a chance to, is that I've been, you could say, decomposing this 3D sound field into many, many sources. So I'm actually decomposing it with a beamforming technique into 97 sources. And I can just sort of very briefly show, I think if I, yeah, there we go, it's going on the wrong screen there. So you could see that you've got 360 sound field, and I'm decomposing that into 97 directions. And each of those directions is then going to contain some sound information that's relevant to the direction that these lobes are pointing. This means I now have 97 sources, which I've decomposed from my original sound field. And once I've got these sources, then I can re-encode them into a much higher resolution. Now, what's been very interesting is that you could say the ambisonics theory says this shouldn't really work because I'm using more sources than the original sound field supports. But what's been very interesting is that previously I got an idea that maybe this was going to work, but I didn't have a good way to test it. And that's one of the things I've been able to do in here. So I've been doing a lot of A/B comparisons between the original and then this decomposed and re-encoded sound field. And the space actually opens up quite a lot. There are many other challenges to working with these very high order or very high resolution sound fields, but I won't talk about those now. We could maybe talk about them later on this afternoon if some of you come back. Yes, so I think it's probably a good idea to play something now. One of the things which I also wanted to do was to, say, make a mock-up. So this means I now need to recreate what was the real background sound in the installation space, which I showed you the photograph of. So in addition to the sound recordings and the materials that I've made for the composition which was played back into the original space, I also need to play back a recording of the background sound field. Again, with these challenges of it being one resolution of 3D sound in the recording, then trying to unfold that into a higher resolution 3D sound in this space to get a sense of the background reality of that real space. I'm also using impulse responses to capture the real 3D reverberation of the outdoor space, and convolution techniques to try to replace these sounds into that sense of reality. And yes, maybe I will turn this off because I think it's distracting to have a TV screen. Give me 1 moment. Actually, maybe, thank you, Tana. Yes, let's see. Oh, good. Right, I can get my max patch back. The piece is a 15-minute loop. I'm just going to play the 15 minutes, or maybe I have to stop soon if we're running out of time. Yeah, okay. Right, and feel free to get up and walk around. This is an installation, it's not a concert piece. So don't expect lots of really dynamic things happening all the time. There's quite a lot of dynamic stuff, but not as much as I'd normally have in one of my compositions. Yeah, okay, so here we go. Let's just play. Been asked to stop now, so we've got time for questions. So you've heard about the first, about half of the loop. It develops further with other kinds of sounds. If you want to hear the whole work, then I can play it in its entirety later on today, if you'd like to come back. And questions then?
Thank you so much. First off, let's round of applause.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I say at ICAT that my mind is blown twice a week, and I think I might have hit it a couple. Anyway, the ways that we can use this space and this technology are just amazing. Thank you for sharing your work with us today. What questions do we have? And if you're online, Ashley, just let me know if we have questions come in online. We'd love to see those. But who's got questions in the room? We'll start there. Eric.
An observation?
Sure.
Which is that I was listening, first of all, beautiful, beautiful work. Thank you for that. But also I was listening towards the edge and did not get the collapse of an image that very often happens with ambisonics. Why is that?
That is because I'm working in a very high order ambisonics, which means that you can recreate a source in space without it collapsing to a loudspeaker. It also means that the listening area is very large, and this is important, of course, for concerts, which is why I work with this very high resolution, because it not only gives you a high accuracy in direction and clarity of the sources, it expands the realistic listening area in the concert room.
Can you talk a little bit? Oh, Tanner's got one. I'll come to Tanner. I'll come back to mine if needed.
Maybe it's the same question. What's surprising you as an artist working with this content in spaces like this? Are you still getting surprised by new things and excited by things?
Yeah, I think there's two main, I guess, features, ear openers, we can say, when we get into space like this. One is because it is large and you're able to have a sense of, I guess you get a sense of expansiveness, which lacks, I think, when you're in smaller, tighter spaces. And often large numbers of loudspeakers, they're not always set up in big enough spaces. And a space like this, because it is big, it has a good sense of height. It allows you to address these very enveloping but spacious sound fields. And that's something which was very clear, which is wonderful about working in this room. I wish my studio was this size. The other is that because there are so many loudspeakers, you have so many choices, which is great as well, because you're not restricted by the technology. If you just have a few loudspeakers, then that means you are limited to the resolution of the sound field that you can recreate and reproject. Whereas in here, of course, you don't have to use all the loudspeakers. One of the things which I've done, which I didn't talk about earlier, is that as you can see in the room, the horizontal layer is higher density than the vertical in the ceiling. And this means that in the horizontal layer, I can work with a very high accuracy spatial sound field, which means that I can have a very accurate point source, or I can have a big spread of many sources to create an envelopment which, is perceptually, it's in line with our perception of the real world, which is really what I wanted to do, is try to recreate the sense of being there in the installation, but in a concert room. And that is an incredibly difficult thing to do. Of course, we're still lacking the weather, the rain, the snow, the sunshine, the wind, the sensation of tactile senses, all our other senses. We're missing those things. But at least for our ears, if I can try to recreate that complete sense of reality, then I'm very happy, and this is something which I've experienced in this space.
I have non-technical understanding of soundscapes, but thinking about embodiment, and one thing that was striking to me is that I was listening with my eyes in this, a little bit in this space that is dark. Do you know what I mean? But my eyes wanted to get involved, and I was confused by that in my body a little bit, but in a good way, where I was just noticing that, and I liked it. So, thanks.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting, actually. it'd be nice to hear more about that sense of embodiment and the visual imagery that sounds can evoke.
It was amazing, and I felt like I'm in that the time of the sunrise or in the evening, like sunset. And do you have particular time period you are like focus to collect the sound?
Well, I collected sounds at different times of day because the city has different background noise depending on the time of day. So I was collecting sound both early in the morning, late at night, but also in the middle of the day to be able to get a variety of sounds. And one of the ideas behind my work is that, I'm heavily influenced by Gibson's ecology, and I want to be able to take a step back. So I record long durations of sound, and I don't select specific sounds for the recording as such. I just leave the recorder running and I take home what I get. And that's very important for me, which means I'm recording throughout the day, different days of the week and different seasons to capture that entirety. And then the artistic intervention comes in, of course, when I'm then extracting the useful things from these recordings. And actually sunrise and sunset, they're actually quite interesting times, but depending on what time of year it is when it comes to background noise as well.
Just one more quick question.
Okay. I'm curious as to the application of this, because you probably don't have too many places in the world with this sort of setup. Although I was in the San Francisco Opera House, one of their auditoriums had, I believe it was, I don't recall the name, the Constellation system maybe, but is that right? So a similar setup to this, right? This multi-directional and the acoustical properties that they could do to mimic a concert hall versus a chamber. It was phenomenal. So my question is, what are the applications? Because it's not like you can just play this in your home audio theater.
Yeah, sure. There are three answers. Okay. So the first is, in this space, if I can recreate that sense of reality, then I know I have a work which I can take to these other spaces. And constellation loudspeaker is, like you've explained, they are becoming more common. The little caveat is that often you can't address the loudspeakers independently unless you go via, for example, Mayor Sound's own protocol. But I mean, that's a teething problem. But since high-density loudspeaker arrays are more common, and it means that it's a learning process. So I've understood what can be done, but that can't be done in my own studio. I can compose in my own studio, I can work with my knowledge of 3D sound, but to actually experiment and hear results like this, that's something which has to be done in a space like this. So that means I now go home with a new set of knowledge which I can apply in my work. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that what this has led on to actually has been more experiments with new sound, because this is something I did on the first day I was here. But because I've now found a way to decompose these recordings, which I mentioned, into many, many sources, once you've got those sources, suddenly things change because you can do new things that you didn't think of you doing before. And so that's then allowed me to experiment with a new tool set and some new technically and artistically connected ideas, which I wouldn't have stumbled across if I hadn't gone through this first process of working in here. So it's an artistic development as well, which of course the sounds I work with in here, I have to listen in a different way when I get into my own studio, but the actual artistic process, I've got a new tool in my chest for artistic development. And then the final thing is that one of the important things for me why I work with ambisonics is that it is portable. It means that everything I do in here, I can play back in other spaces with less loudspeakers, and what I sacrifice is that spatial resolution, that spatial accuracy. But I still get a 3D sound field, but at a lower resolution, and it's a portable format.
Well, thank you so much for being here this morning, for your questions, and for sharing your artistry with us. For our friends online, I hope you'll like and subscribe, and you all can like and subscribe as well. Just head on over to our YouTube channel. Thank you for being here this morning. Next week, we'll be back in the Creativity and Innovation District, the CID, and we will be bridging streams and cities. So we'll see you then. Have a great weekend.